We have with us today one of Maryland's greatest raconteurs of Maryland history. Mike Miller. Mike Miller's fingerprints are literally on every historic program, historic preservation project, anything that involves Maryland history for the last 30 or 40 years, Mike has had something to do with. And he's so well known at it that you think he does it all by himself. But what you forget is that he, up there in the Senate and the State House, he has to get all these other people on board in order to get it done. He has to deal with sort of this river of governors and legislators and comptrollers and senators, and he's got to convince them to do it, which is a really complicated task, much more complicated than just doing it. So I think we're really lucky today to have him here to speak to us, but we've got one thing to do before he does that. We have an honor guard of Bobby Oster and Bowie Arnott. Front and center, please. Mike, will you come forward, please? And Patty. The Society would like to present you with this captain's chair. Captain is just below the President of the Senate, which is engraved to say, thank you for all you've done for the history of Maryland and people of Maryland. Thank you. Great.
Thank you. No, the picture. I know, we're honored. Last time I was with Gene, it was a fundraiser in Baltimore, and he and his wife lent very generous donors. And the night had concluded, and we'd all had a few pops, you know. It's just, and I had a band there and playing old-time songs. And Gene and I like Patsy Cline. And so the manager was trying to close down the restaurant. And of course, my donor said, "Can I hear one more Patsy Cline?" So I went to the band and I said, "Could you play Crazy by Patsy Cline for the Roberts family?" He said, "Sure." He goes, "Crazy." And the manager comes running up to me with some choice words, and I come back with choice words. And then, of course, the Baltimore Sun reporter is going to, report the golden word that I used to play Patsy Cline one more time. But anyway, Gene's off-the-cuff remarks will get you in trouble every single time, believe me. The chair that I'm presented will go in my library. I don't have enough for everybody, but this is a picture of my library that Patty took yesterday. Anyway, we have separate wings in our house. She's got her side of the house, and we got the middle where we meet, and there's my wing. I've got a 5,000 volume library, and I've got the French doors that open on the bay, 2 fireplaces. I got a pool table, a computer, a bar, what have you. But my wife wanted to make sure I had somebody to talk to when I go back there to drink. And so she put these 4 statues back there. I got Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Paul Jones, and George Washington. And she's decorated my side of the house for Christmas, put Christmas hats on all the statues, and this is the bottom half of the library. But anyway, this is where your chair is going to go in my library, okay? So we appreciate it very much. Thank you so much. My wife Patty and I, we're not boat people. We wish we were. I'm related to the Calvert women. Patty is from the Calvert men's side. Sir John Calvert Knight was her 10th grandfather. His son was Leonard Redmond Calvert, and of course he was the grandfather of George Calvert. So Patty's a cousin to the Calverts, and I married up. When I married, of course, all men do marry up, I thought I was marrying somebody from Montgomery County, and her Prince George's roots are much stronger than mine. Ninian Bell was her grandfather, et cetera, et cetera. But I wish she was as interested in genealogy as I am. But what I have here today is I have Catherine Arthur. I'm not sure. Maybe she joined Clinton Daly in the ladies' room. I'm not sure, the men's room, but she's back here. Catherine's with the archivist, and I always try to give anybody some little pizzazz. What we have here, this is a map done in 1932, and it's all the spots that George Washington visited in the state of Maryland where he didn't stay. As you know, he would come over and visit the Diggs home, he would visit the Marshall home, he would visit the Calvert home at Mount Airy. But these are 90 different locations where George Washington actually visited in Hartford, Kent County, et cetera, like that. So if you want to look at your county where George Washington stayed and the occasion of it, this is the routes traveled by George Washington, Maryland, and places he stayed. But our archivist, Catherine Arthur, and others are responsible for the books that you have on your desk that I'm going to refer to. And also, there's a picture of a horse on your desk. They got books, they got 2 books, and they got a picture of a horse. I'm a preservationist. I'm not an erasure type of person. And so the statues that we have, I've always voted to keep them. The most controversial one was Roger Taney. And the vote was 2-1. Roger Taney's statue was erected in 1867. It was done unanimously. The governor, head of the Naval Academy was there. Everybody agreed. He served in the House chamber as a delegate from Culver County, right outside that window. He served as a state senator from Frederick County, right outside that same window. As a very prominent Baltimore lawyer, he was appointed Associate Attorney General of the United States, became Attorney General of the United States. He was responsible for the nullification clause that kept South Carolina in the Union and the Jackson administration. He became Treasurer of the United States. He became Secretary of War of the United States. He was voted out by Clay, Webster, Calhoun, et cetera. And then later on, he was appointed Supreme Court Justice and swore in 6 presidents of the United States. He was regarded as one of the 10 best Chief Justices of the United States, except for the Taney decision. He voted to avoid a war, and his decision helped bring on a war. And of course, that's what he's remembered by. But now the statue's removed, and we have a void there coming up from the harbor to the State House. And what this talk is about, as I asked Gene what he wanted to talk to me about, what I should talk about, he said, well, when we came there, you were going to talk about the oils, the Calvert oils that you rescued from the Enoch Pratt Library and brought to Annapolis. He said, why don't you talk about some of that? So if we would, well, we're going to talk about the State House. So there's a void there where the Taney statue was. And of course, the focal point of the State House is George Washington. George Washington. The 4th most important document in the United States, 4th most important document in the United States is on display right there in our State House. There's the Declaration of Independence, there's the Constitution, there's the Bill of Rights, and then there's Washington's resignation speech. We have his original resignation speech. There are 2 copies, one in archives, one at the Library of Congress, but we have his handwritten version where he made the edits. He made the edits about saying, I'm not going to come back forever, et cetera, et cetera. He was contemplating he might come back in some form or another, but we have the original document on display there. And when he got through with his speech, he handed it to his aide, James McHenry. And it stayed in James McHenry's family until this past century, 2007, when we acquired it and put it on display. So what we have here, George Washington wanted to leave on December 23rd. He wanted to get home for Christmas, December 1983. And so he got there December 19th, and they said, when should I give my resignation speech? And they said, on the 23rd. So for 4 days, he stayed at Mann's Tavern in Annapolis, and he contemplated what he should do, and he wrote his resignation speech, and he made several edits along the way, and came back on the 23rd, and at noon, and I'm going to go through this booklet very briefly and just show you what we put on display there. but he wanted to be able to leave and get on his horse and ride back to Mount Vernon. So what we're going to do is we're going to restore the Treasury building, which I'm going to display to you in a little while. People are going to come to that. They're going to become a visitor center in the Treasury building. And then they're going to walk up the hill and they're going to see this horse there. It's a question which is going to excite Jay Griswold and other of you good people, the horse people, to no extent. We're going to have an equestrian, a horse there, right there inside the State House, and George Washington's manservant, Billy Lee, standing by the horse. So he can get ready to get on that horse and head back to Mount Vernon. And of course, then what they're going to do is then they're going to come in the State House and they're going to see the resignation speech. They're going to go in the old Senate chamber, which has been fully restored. They're going to look at the House chamber, which has been fully restored. And they'll see the Calvert oils. So I want to thank you very much for having me here. This isn't the conclusion of my speech, but what it is, because I like to start off with a little sort of like a joke anecdote, especially that historians would appreciate. William Jefferson Clinton was a good friend of mine. Okay, still a good friend of mine. I was president of the Senate when he was governor of Arkansas. That's how long I've been involved in politics. And when we heard he was going to run for president of the Senate, we invited him to come to Prince George's County, Maryland. And he came to Greenbelt Marriott. I know y'all can't relate to this, but he met my mother, and she told him that she was the mother of 10 adult children, all registered Democrats. Okay? Anyway, he gravitated toward my mom immediately. I hope that's why he gravitated toward my mom. Anyway, she invited him to come to Clinton, Maryland, our home. We'd do an event, Clinton and Clinton. And of course, he'd, yes, ma'am, I'll be there right away. So, but nowadays, they're not so much concerned with what the president's going to say. This is the president of the United States. They want the appropriate backdrop. Ever since Reagan and Deaver, they want CNN, ABC, they want the place for the television to zoom in on. They want flags flying in the backdrop. And they said, what do you have in Clinton, Maryland, we can bring the President of the United States? So meanwhile, I think I'd bring him to B.K. Miller's Super Liquor Store in Clinton, Maryland. That's a family business. I figure putting my 9 brothers and sisters, my mom in front of the store. But, and they looked at this store. They sent these 4 people from Arkansas to look at that. They said, you must be crazy. We can't bring the President of the United States. Everything that Democrats are supposed to be against, you guys are for here in Clinton, Maryland. Whiskey, red meat, shotgun shells, tobacco bed covers, whatever, We can't bring the President of the United States here. What else do you have in the town? I couldn't take him to the Clinton American Legion because of the Vietnam issue. Couldn't take him to St. John's Catholic Church because of the abortion issue. They said, what else do you have in the town? I said, there's the Clinton Volunteer Fire Company, company number 25, Clinton and Clinton. And see, the fire department's located right behind the liquor store. I could figure out walking right around. And so it was a Saturday morning, so we had these 4 people from Arkansas outside the fire department. They said, this is perfect, Clinton and Clinton. They said, what's that noise inside the fire department? I said, I don't know. We went inside. They had the slot machines going, and the big 6 wheels. I said, it's a little fundraiser for Southern Maryland. They said, we can't bring the President of the United States to some gambling den. Are you crazy? What else do you have in the town? I said, well, we have the Mary Surratt Museum. So collectively, these 4 people from Arkansas said, well, who in the hell was Mary Surratt? I said, she was a lady who was hung for helping to assassinate the President of the United States. But, so they brought him to their town, but they stayed way the hell away from that museum, I can tell you that. So I asked Gene what I should talk about. He said, well, you should talk about what we were going to talk about, like I say, when the cancer forced you to cancel out when you bought the oils, the Calvert oils. The Calvert oils were very challenging. Dr. Hugh Young had assembled them. The Eden family had fallen on hard times. They'd been in the Eden family since the 1600s. And Cecil Calvert was by far the most valuable of the paintings, Charles Leonard, et cetera. It's a fabulous, fabulous oils. And Dr. Hugh Young had assembled, he'd gotten 5 of them, but he couldn't get the 6th one. William Randolph Hearst had the most valuable one. And so he gave them he wanted to put them on permanent display. In those days, the library, the Pratt Library, was the best place for them. And he gave them to them the condition that they obtained the 6th painting, which they eventually did. And of course, it was a big deal in those days. They had postcards made up. School children would come and see them, etc. But when Sir Eden came to Maryland about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, he saw them up in a corner, in a dark corner. Nobody really knew what they were or cared where. He said, "Can you find something better for my ancestors?" These are very valuable paintings. So everything was fine, and then the Enoch Pratt Library needed money for a new branch. So I figured this is an opportunity to make a deal. You know, we can get you the money for a new branch, but I need those oil paintings in Annapolis. And so we entered into a long-term permanent lease, and the Calvert oils are on display right as you come to the State House. They're gorgeous. Now, that wasn't the worst battle. The worst battle I had to deal with the Maryland archivists. Because guess what? They weren't there when Washington was there, okay? They wanted the State House exactly as it was when George Washington was there, and I needed the Calvert oils displayed. And so we got them on top of right outside the House chambers. You come in, the first thing you see, they're absolutely gorgeous. So we reached a compromise, and it worked out quite well. So anyway, I'm a historian. People say, how did you get there? Well, you grew up before television, okay? I was with a guy last night who worth $7 billion. He founded a game called Fortnite. Fortnite. A little engineering student graduated from College Park, 1993, from Potomac, Maryland. And he took his private plane, flew up here to get an award from the University of Maryland School of Engineering. He grew up with computers. You know, I didn't grow up with computers. I didn't grow up with TVs. I grew up with books. My aunts would give me books about Robert E. Lee and George Custer and things of that nature. And my father's family fought for the South. My mom's family fought for the North. And we'd take trips, family trips to Bull Run and Gettysburg and Harper's Ferry and stuff like that. It encouraged my interest in it. And of course, growing up in southern Maryland, where all these Mitchells are good from and the Ewells, et cetera, we're surrounded by all these old plantation houses that needed restoration and preservation. So when my first bills became a member of the Senate, I was 31, was preserved the Buck House in Upper Marlboro, the Magruder House in Bladensburg, Oxon Hill Manor, et cetera. And so it's been a lifelong career preserving historical sites. Just several years ago, a fellow presented me this old abandoned farmhouse down in Charles County. I found it's Rich Hill. It's where John Wilkes Booth stopped at Samuel Cox's house. And it was an old abandoned farmhouse, and now we've restored it. It's going to be the head of the Charles County Historical Society. We bought 5 acres around it to protect it. So anywhere you see a site like that, it needs preservation. You go to the Sons of the American Revolution and others, and just bring it to our attention. We've got bond bills that can help make these things happen. When I went to California about 30 years ago, I saw where the California legislature had restored the California legislative buildings the way it was during the gold rush days. And I thought maybe we could do something like that in Annapolis, because the Annapolis, our State House was really gutted. The old House chamber had been completely wiped out, and it was just 2 separate blank rooms. The rooms, the inner rooms next to the Senate chamber, they were used for committee rooms. They had televisions, not televisions, but telephones and desks and things of that nature. So we set about finding a way to preserve and protect, and that's the reason Catherine Arthur is here, because what we have is we have these books. If we could just turn to them real quickly. You can just see, if you could, very briefly. So on page 6, you'll see a picture in the corner of the State House as it was in 1789. Now, when we've restored it, people say the old Senate chamber looks like a bowling alley because it looks brand new. Well, our State House was commissioned in 1772. It was built in 1779, and then they offered it to the Congress of the United States. They said, look, you guys come here. We'll give you our State House. We'll give you our government house. We'll give you the Paca House. Thomas Jefferson opened up an office on the 2nd floor of our State House. He would walk around our State House every morning for his exercise, every morning. And he had an office up there for like 6 months until he was appointed ambassador to France, right there from Annapolis. So if you look at the State House, you see the Treasury Building. That's where we're going to have the Visitor Center. And they're going to walk up the hill, and they're going to see Jay Griswold's horse up there on the corner. And they're going to see Billy Lee there, his manservant. And they're going to walk inside, and that's what the looked like in 1789. If you go to page 9, you see the governor's mansion before it was redone in the State House. And then the next page, if you look on page 10, you see the Senate chamber as it looks today. This is how the Congress of the United States, they sat around in a circle where Washington came in the middle and gave his resignation speech. And this is basically how the room looks today. You can see the following page on page 12 where Washington stands there. And what we have, you can walk through this room. We have school children walk through this room and they stand by Washington. They have their picture taken. Later on in the book, you're going to see a picture of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass came to our State House and he gave Washington's address. What we're going to have is in the Old House chamber, where we restore the Old House chamber, we're going to have these small statues of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass there, sort of like George Washington. And it's only appropriate because guess what? In 1864, in that House of Delegates chamber, they legalized, or rather abolished slavery. They abolished it in the Constitution. Now, if you were a Confederate, you couldn't vote. If you wouldn't take an oath to the United States, you couldn't vote. And it still only passed by a very small margin of abolition of slavery in 1864. Now, when the Southerners and people who supported the South had the right to vote, guess what? Maryland rejected the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment in that very room. So we think it's only appropriate that as we've restored the House chamber, the exact way it was during the Civil War period, we've restored the Senate chamber the way it was during the Revolutionary War period, we've restored the House chamber the way it was during the Civil War period, it's only appropriate that we have these statues of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass looking on. If you go up to as far as, let's see, you'll see page 24. We went and did the exact prints of the paint, everything. We restored the fireplace to make it look exactly as it was. This picture of William Pitt on page 31 was hanging on the wall when George Washington was there. That's there. Now, if you look at on page 32, this is the room as it exists today. This was when, up till about 5 years ago, these were two blank spaces, two blank, called the gold room and silver room, where we had meeting places. Now, there's a very important picture on page 34, if you could. George Washington came to Annapolis as a lobbyist. He was, he resigned, he'd given his resignation speech. He said, I'm going back to be a farmer. But again, he made the ultimates. He made the edits saying, you know, I might come back at some point in time. Well, he came back to lobby for the Potomac River Compact, to the chagrin of the Baltimore merchants and the people in Baltimore, who wanted Baltimore to be the terminus, the eastern terminus to the west. And but Washington and Thomas Johnson from Frederick wanted the Potomac River Compact to be the terminus to the west. And he came back and he lobbied, and he was defeated a couple times in 1782. Came back in 1784 and was successful. Meanwhile, he had this picture painted from real life. This picture on page 34 painted from real life while he was here in Annapolis. And when he came back as a lobbyist in 1784, this picture was on the wall. So he's a lobbyist lobbying in Annapolis, not only for the Potomac River Compact, but later on for Maryland to cede 5 square miles of land for a nation's capital versus New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. Now, what happened is because these 4 congressmen switched their votes, Charles Carroll of Carrollton yielded to Jefferson, they yielded to Madison, and others. And so instead of saying, you know, the capital should be somewhere else, they agreed for the state to assume the war debts, that the federal government assumed the war debts of Massachusetts and others. But they also agreed that the capital of the United States was going to be on the Potomac River, and Maryland was going to cede 5 square miles of ground. Now, what happened at that point in time, like, you know, you politics, you talk about gerrymandering, reapportionment, redistricting, what have you. In those days, to avoid all that, the congressman ran at large throughout the whole state. Well, the Baltimore merchants were so upset that these 4 congressmen had voted for Washington to be the capital of Washington, D.C., they voted them all out of office. Daniel Carroll, et cetera, they voted them all out of office. And later on, in 1824, when Lafayette came for his triumphant tour of the nation, when he came through Maryland, he saw this picture of himself on this painting also. But the painting was him as a 19-year-old boy. And this vain Frenchman said, look, I need the painting redone. So in 1824, they redid the painting, painted him as a bald-headed man, contemporary of Washington and Tillman. Now, we were able to rescue from the Maryland Historical Society Tillman's spurs. We have his sword. So this painting is on the wall right there in Annapolis next to the Senate chamber. And next to that, you can see his sword and his spurs in this painting. We've got the sword and the spurs in that painting as well. And then the concluding picture on this page, well, on 40 you see Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. You'll see the burning of the Peggy Stewart and the founding of the colony. Those pictures hang in the old House chamber. And again, on page 44 and 45, you can see the House chamber as it was in 1860, and you can see what we've done with it in terms of taking 2 empty rooms and restoring it so that school children can come in and everybody could look and see the House chamber the way it was during the Civil War. So let me just close by saying that it's a privilege and honor for me to be here. Again, we're looking down on those 4 Calvert oils, and what we're looking down on is again, the most important document outside of the 3 that I mentioned, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, George Washington's resignation speech. And it's very important that we recognize what we have in Annapolis is a gem. I know some of you have visited there. I've been with this group before here. I've been with you at Kipling Hall in England. I visited with you in the Society this past summer. This tie I'm wearing, not because of the Ark and Dove Society, because Truman Siemens actually spent money on this tie for me. Can you believe it? The tightest man in the state of Maryland actually bought a tie. I think because maybe he figured I trekked all the way down to St. Mary's County, he was going to buy a $65 tie for me, but he did, and we're very honored. I'm glad Nellie's not here because I would mention his parsimony at every speech, and she would get to, he's not that way, he's not that way. Well, how come all the checks have to come from you, Nellie? How come they always have to come from you, not him? So anyway, let me conclude by saying I have a friend of mine named Lou Riley, a Republican senator from the Eastern Shore, great guy, had 15 grandchildren like myself, and he's recovering from a heart attack. And he's there with his wife, Ginny, and one grandchild comes in and says, "Pop, Pop, make it sound like a frog." Nothing. Another grandchild in comes and says, "Pop, Pop, make it sound like a frog." Nothing. Third grandchild comes and says, "Pop, Pop, make it sound like a frog." He says, "What is this grandchild? Pop, Pop, make it sound like a frog." Grandma says, "If Grandpa croaks, we're all going to go to Disney World." Well, I'm going to head back to Calvert County, but I just want you to know that when I really appreciate what you do in terms of keeping history alive for young people, and it's very important that this society stays alive and grows. It's the best of all possible worlds. 1, citizens of the United States. 2, residents of the state of Maryland. 3, we're descendants of people who came from Cowes, England. 1633, November 22nd, 1633. Hardy souls who got on 2 boats, came to a place called Maryland. Thank you. God bless you.